comes out of nowhere for us. We haven't been working through Isaiah, so first I'm going to teach a little bit. We'll talk about some context for the passage, see the world that Isaiah actually lived in, and break down the passage a little bit. I'll invite Betty then to come up and read the scripture, give you all a much needed break from my voice, and then we'll come back together and finish with a little more preaching. So here's the nuts and bolts of Isaiah's mess. So just imagine the ominous music from Game of Thrones in the background and pretend I have a lovely, deep baritone announcer's voice. Maybe I should have asked Wayne to work on that song for me. So there's this rising threat from Assyria in the north. And there's a small coalition of countries that have band together to resist the might of Assyria. And at this time, the Hebrew people are living in a divided kingdom. You have Israel in the north, and you have Judah below them in the south. And Isaiah is trying to warn them both not to join this coalition, because they should be relying on God instead of relying on each other and relying on brute force. Israel ends up joining the coalition, and Judah does not. So things turn bad for Israel, and they decide to try and make peace with Assyria, the proverbial bad guys. And they try and join forces with them and betray Judah and attack them instead. So this entire time, Isaiah is trying to be a peacemaker. And he's trying to warn the kings not to bring in outside armies, not to rely on foreign gods, or else Israel's going to suffer. The joys of being a prophet, right? It's a good thing nothing like this occurs today. Trying to broker peace between radicalized groups within your own country. When both sides have become so rigid and so full of anger and fear that they ignore reason, that they ignore their own faith, that they ignore those trying to speak a calming word. Nothing like that ever happens. So our passage that we're going to read is the call story of Isaiah. This is the moment he receives a prophetic vision from God, telling him the daunting task that's before him. And it's known in the Bible as a vocation story. And there's many in the Bible. You can think of Moses telling the burning bush no like 50 times, or you can think of Saul's dramatic conversion to Paul. And this call story has just tons of rich and beautiful significance that we just don't have enough time in the day to really dive into in the sermon. But I encourage you to come to Second Cup and ask some questions, because there's a lot that we can unpack. So there are a few things that regularly occur in a call story in the Bible. And I want us to listen for those when Betty reads the scripture. So first, the one called almost always declines. So the one called to do something by God in the Bible almost always declines first. Moses, for instance, said he was afraid. Isaiah feels unworthy. And second, God reassures the one that is called. For Isaiah, there's a beautiful symbolic gesture where a hot coal touches his lips, and this makes him pure before God. And then third, they are called to a specific people and a specific task. Unfortunately, Isaiah's calling is a total bummer. There's a small glimmer of hope at the end, where there's a holy seed that remains, even though the tree of Israel has been burned to the stone. But Isaiah isn't promised he will see this holy seed to come, only that it will remain with Israel. And even though Isaiah knows the challenges ahead, and even though he didn't feel worthy to the task at all in the first place, he ends up boldly proclaiming, "Here I am, Lord, send me."
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphims were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. 2 of them they covered their faces, and with 2 of them they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to the other and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voice of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphims flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraphim touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed, and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. And he said, Go and say to these people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of these people dull, and stop their ears, and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes, and listen with their ears, and comprehend with their minds, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitation, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a 10th part remains in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. These are the words of the Lord.
Thank you, God.
So did you catch those 3 typical elements of the call story in the scripture? Isaiah declines, he feels unworthy or unholy, unclean. God reassures him, declares him holy, declares him worthy of the task before him. And then he's called to a specific people with a specific message. And even after knowing how hard that call was, he wouldn't back down. Here I am, Lord, send me. Those words are some of the most inspirational and simultaneously terrifying words in the Bible for me. And with the rest of my time, I really want to focus on that. So reflecting on Isaiah for a moment, do you ever feel that we are facing a somewhat skeptical and volatile society? I relate to Isaiah in that he's working with a nation that is ever seeing and never perceiving, ever listening but never truly understanding. Sometimes I feel like in the church we are screaming from a mountaintop about grace, about love, about acceptance, about community, about support, about serving others. But sometimes I feel like there's just a communication breakdown of some kind between what the church is and how the church is perceived. In the early 2000s, the Barna Research Group did a study that found the most common objections to the Christian church were that it was judgmental, cared only about money, and was anti-gay. Recently, they did a different survey asking what those who are openly church seekers, what they are looking for. And the number 1 response was knowing that everyone will be welcomed. And the number 2 response, going to a place where I can make friends and nurture friendships. Now, if I had to describe this church and my experience among this faith community, I would put those 2 things on the list. I believe we are welcoming, and I believe we are To be honest, sometimes it can be exhausting. I can sympathize with Isaiah. We are doing all that we can to share God's love and grace, to be welcoming and nurturing, but the church can still be seen as judgmental, money-hungry, anti-gay. That's the question, isn't it? How do we overcome this communication breakdown and share that message of grace and love with our community? For Isaiah, even though his story had those dramatic images in it, essentially God said, here are the people you are to minister to, this is your message, and here's the challenges you will encounter. And to be blunt, the same might be said for us here. That's what that New Beginnings study was all about. What is our vocation? How do we best share God's love to this people in this time, in this community? Our pastor is changing. We know that. But our vocation continues to grow, continues to expand. And just like Isaiah, we know the people, we know the message, and we're well aware of the challenges. So a vocation is a specific calling. And we as Christians, we all have specific callings in our lives that can change and they can evolve over time. And as a church, we have specific vocations too that change and adapt and evolve over time. We've seen this play out here. We've taken on ministries and new challenges, and we've seen some fade out. We've taken on feeding programs, Desert Music Academy, Messy Church, participation in the Gay Pride Parade, just to name a few of the recent ministries. But it's not time to rest. If anything, right now is the best shape this church has ever been in to increase our impact in the community. And I've said this before, but I believe we are one of the largest and most well-equipped churches in the desert that preaches this open theology. We are in the minority when we preach that women can be leaders in the church and in the world. We are in the minority when we proclaim that all are created equal and all means all. We have a vocation. We have a community around us to serve. And we have a message. We know the challenges that in front of us. And trust me, there are many people in the desert looking for that voice telling them, you are welcomed and you will be nurtured. And I want to make this a little more personal now. Consider those 6 dangerous words I talked about. Here I am, Lord, send me. I believe it's inspirational and dangerous because on one hand, beautiful and amazing things happen when people are in tune with the will of God. But on the other hand, it's dangerous because when you are sent by God, you're sent out of your comfort zone. When called by God, you are challenged to look beyond yourself and consider the needs of somebody else. When you are called by God, it's no longer about us at all. It's about those we are sent to serve. And I'm going to paint a picture for you of what I believe the church of the future looks like. You're going to hear 7 specific examples and observations about this church in ways we might potentially make a bigger impact in the community. And remember those top 2 things that church seekers said they were looking for. Looking for a place where all are welcomed and a place where they can be nurtured and foster friendships. And some of these you may agree with, and some you may disagree with, and that's perfectly okay. So first, my generation and younger, we are only taught to learn through the use of electronics and technology. We are conditioned to process information differently than generations before us. There is not a single instance where a child, youth, or young adult is expected to listen and learn strictly through a lecture-style format like this, without any visual aids, interaction, or technology. It just doesn't exist. We have provided messy church and Sunday school, but using a screen, projectors, or monitors in Sunday worship for visual aids is just one way we can better serve the community we are called to reach out to. A community that has been trained to learn through technology. A screen or monitors alone won't magically just double worship service and solve all of the problems in the world. That's a bit ridiculous. But it's a show of radical hospitality. It is healthy for a church to ask, what can we do to make this worship experience more significant for somebody else? And we live in a society where families are unimaginably overscheduled as it is. The average of family who does attend worship only attends every 4 to 6 weeks. Maybe we consider a ministry called Parents' Night Out, where other adults in the congregation help me by providing free childcare once a month on weekends, so parents and guardians can have an opportunity for date night or just take a nap. It's about meeting the needs of those we are called to serve. Number three, the only two growing demographics in the Palm Springs area are families with young children and single retiring adults. There are a large number of people in Palm Springs who have recently moved here and are searching for that community, for that network, that source of friendship. And if we feel this is a vocation, then we can start organizing church-sponsored small groups, studies, fellowship groups, community outings, whatever it may be, at these different clubhouses around town. Do you live somewhere that might enjoy a weekly or monthly fellowship gathering with prayer and study? After all, we are called to go out into Judea, out into Samaria, and out into the ends of the earth. Or maybe even our prayer shawl ministry might want to consider teaching that ministry to local retirement communities so they can carry it on as well. Another major problem we come across, number 4, transportation. As many individuals don't own cars and buses are a problem on Sunday mornings, there is a segment of people who would welcome the opportunity to worship if this community provided rideshare ministries. There might be some people who would be interested in that just for the sake of reducing our carbon footprint. Number 5, the fastest growing worshiping demographic in America is online worshiping. And we have the capability to begin live streaming our worship services next week. But here's the thing, it would need to be approached as a ministry with people willing to learn new skills, willing to go out of your comfort zone to learn a skill to serve somebody you might never actually meet. Or what if the choir reserved time, number 6, at a Thursday night Village Fest on Palm Canyon around December and sang Christmas carols and handed out cards inviting people to come back to a karaoke mixer at church. We know people are seeking community, and music is a universal language that can reach across barriers. And we happen to be blessed with an amazing choir director. And even our worship service, my final point here, number 7, even our worship service can be seen as a vocation. And I'm hoping you'll see why I've made some of the drastic changes in the service I did. For many of you, it is nice when a visitor introduces themselves, says their name, where they're from, and we offer a gift basket or a welcoming bag. For a large portion of you, that is a very welcoming thing to do and a very welcoming practice. But there's also a large portion of us who, if I was told I would have to hold a mic and introduce myself to 150 strangers, I wouldn't show up. It takes a lot of energy just for me to get up and talk in front of all of you. To be pointed at as a stranger is literally one of the most terrifying things that can be done to me personally. Now, I know I've given you these 7 to think about, and there might be some that you agree with, there might be some that absolutely not. But that's okay. I'm listing these, I'm giving options to promote dialogue, so we can talk about this and we can grow as a church. We don't do these ministries so that people will come back to church and give us money. We don't do it so that we can just keep on keeping on. We do ministry because that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. We show love to everyone. Or as John Wesley states it, we do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. In the coming months, we will be having discussions like this, and there will be some changes. Today, I made several big changes to intentionally raise our awareness of this issue. It's incredibly important for all of us to understand that change is not a condemnation or a critique of what was done before. That's so important, I'm going to say it twice. I want everybody to hear this. Change is not a condemnation or critique of what was done before. Isaiah has provided me with a lot of inspiration this week. Because if anyone has ever had a reason to say, "Here I am, Lord," wait, no, never mind. It's Isaiah. He had a civil war going on, political intrigue, treacherous betrayals, and an impending exile. He was told from the beginning his task would be impossible, that the people would be ever hearing and never understanding. The people would be ever seeing and never perceiving. And still he responds, "Send me." May we find the courage and inspiration to do likewise, and see that we can do more for the sake of others.